What's up, guys? It's the new sensation, Big Annotation here, and just over the last weekend I was able to attend the Liverpool sector qualifier, and I decided to take this deck here, Quinlan Vos. As you can see, we've come away with the showcase right here, so I was actually the highest placing Quinlan Vos player, and that is because I managed to make top 8 in the sector qualifier, which I think ended up being around 400 or 450 players. So very, very happy with the top 8 performance. Managed to finally get the day 1 skip for Worlds, and don't have to worry about winning PQs anymore, because those top 4s that I was racking up of PQs over the last season were getting a little bit frustrating, but don't have to worry about that anymore, which is great. And so yeah, I'm just going to explain kind of why I played Quinlan Vos in the tournament rather than Django, and my choices throughout the deck and throughout the day as well. So day 1 was 9 rounds of Swiss. I ended up finishing 8-1. I was undefeated up until the final round, so me and the other undefeated played it out, and I ended up losing the last round, but still very cool bragging rights to come away with. And then day 2 was 4 more rounds of Swiss, a continuation of the day before, so 13 rounds in total. On day 2, I ended up going 2 wins, 1 loss, and 1 intentional draw in the last round because it secured me the top 8, so it made sense to go for it. So overall, 13 rounds, I went 10 wins, 2 losses, and 1 intentional draw. And then, unfortunately, did get knocked out in the first round of top 8 in a very, very close game, which I'll explain later. I'll go over all of the matchups and games after the actual deck. But why did I want to play Quinlan Vos? So obviously the big deck to beat right now is Django. And if you're going to a competitive event right now, this is prior to any bans or erratas that might come into place with like Triple Dark Raid or Django. Very possible that happens later this week, so this could all become redundant. But right now, if you're playing in a competitive event, you probably should just play Django, because that deck is like almost undoubtedly tier 0 right now. You kind of have to play Django, or you have to play to beat Django. So I chose not to play Django because I have not really ever played the deck, and I only had about like 2 weeks of preparation up until this event, because I didn't think I was going to be going to this event. I didn't have a travel or accommodation sorted up until about a week or 2 ago. I actually didn't have travel until a couple of days before the event. So yeah, I wasn't sure that I was actually going to be going, so I didn't put any time into testing until about 2 weeks before the event. And 2 weeks of testing is not going to make me the best Django player in the room when Django is taking up like 20-25% of the field in day 1, and probably a much higher representation in day 2. So I was very, very certain that I would not be one of the better Django players in the room. It's also not a deck that really fits my playstyle, and I just tend to gravitate away from the best decks in the game in general. I like to play something that beats on the best decks rather than actually playing the best decks. And I landed on Quinlan because, I mean, first of all, I really enjoyed playing Han 1 Red last format, and it plays a lot of the same cards. It has a similar sort of game plan, and it gets to play a lot of smuggle cards, which I'm a big fan of. But a big reason why I chose it was because I felt like I could build it in a way that was playable into Django. It not necessarily favored into Django, but at least playable, and I feel like that's what I accomplished. The deck in itself naturally is like a very flexible deck. It's one of those decks where you can kind of have good game into any matchup. You can make any game into a skill game, which is the kind of deck that I really like. But then also, if you know the meta and you can specialize the build towards the meta, then it can give you advantages in certain matchups, or at least like water down some of the worst matchups, which is really good. And obviously the meta is quite clear right now, because we know that we're going to be playing against a lot of Django in these tournaments. So if I can tech the deck to beat Django, or at least feel playable into the matchup, then the rest of the matchups take a little bit of a hit, but they're still going to be like skill expressive games, and they're still going to be fairly even games as well, just because of the way that Quinlan Vos naturally like operates, because you get to play cards like Force Throw and other stuff like that, which is like a Spark of Rebellion as well, Kira, all of the hand destruction stuff, but specifically all of the like targeted hand destruction stuff is very skill intensive because you have to know which cards to pick at which times and which turns to actually use the cards as well. So yeah, there's a lot of like good skill expression in the deck which comes with it, which I gravitate towards quite a lot. And I wanted to build the deck in a way that was going to be able to be playable into Django, and as long as I could do that, I felt pretty comfortable with the rest of the matchups in the room as well. And also the deck just got some really nice cards in the last set. So we'll go into the list. Obviously we're playing TARKINTOWN. It's kind of just the best build of Quinlan in my opinion. I did actually mess around with some versions of like Quinlan ECL where you're going super wide. Quinlan Blue was not something that I tried out, but I did consider it as like an option. I just didn't have enough time to try it out. But Quinlan TARKINTOWN felt like the de facto option to go for because it's already proven that it's a very strong deck. And I think it was the second most represented deck in the room as well. And I'm pretty sure it had like very good representation in Milan and Denver as well. So going into the list, I ended up playing 6 1-drops, and I guess this is like the least standard part of my list. I'm going to be honest, the rest of the deck is pretty normal Quinlan stuff. But this is the main decision that I made that I didn't see a lot of people on. I think there was a build in Milan that was on like 9 1-drops, including these 6. And I did mess around with like a couple of different builds that I saw from Milan and from like different places online. And I liked the idea of the 1-drops for a couple of reasons, which I'll explain. But overall, I didn't like that particular build because it felt like it ran out of gas super quickly. But I like the 1-drops, and I like these 1-drops specifically because they give Quinlan the ability to actually race other like aggro or mid-range decks very easily. And it also, the 1-drop is obviously very important to enable your Quinlan ping on turn 1 or 2. If your opponent opens with 1-drops themselves, often a big weakness of Quinlan is that you have to match the costs that they're playing. And if they're playing a deck that has 1-drops that they can flexibly play when you've only got 2-drops as your turn 1 plays, then you're not going to get any value out of your leader ping. It's going to make it harder to get an early TARKINTOWN, harder to take control of the board early, and if you don't have board control, then your hand control stuff becomes a lot less effective because you're going to be falling behind on board whilst investing mana into attacking their hand, which doesn't really matter unless you have the board as well. So getting ahead on the board is like super important early on in this deck. And so you want to have that flexibility into a meta where there are 1-drops existing. Currently in this meta, we know that there are 1-drops existing because the builds that did well in Milan of Django were playing a lot of X1s especially, but also the ISB agent is obviously a 1-drop. So things like the Death Star Stormtrooper, the First Order Stormtrooper, Greedo obviously, all very, very strong targets to ping if you're able to get there. And I was, for this exact reason, I was considering Cad Bane, but the issue with Cad Bane is that you can't guarantee where the ping is going to go. If they open up with 2 1-drops and one of them's like an ISB agent, then you can't force them to ping the Greedo, whereas in this deck you can choose where the ping goes as long as you match up with the costs. So I really wanted to have 1-drops to have the ability to ping out the opponent's 1-drops, especially in the Django matchups. And it also allows you to race the Django matchups a little bit easier, because the issue with Django, with the new set stuff that's come out, is that it has insane top end right now, and Quinlan Vos does not naturally have very good top end, especially when you're playing a 25 HP base. You want to be going a little bit faster because you don't have that 5 extra health to work with to get you to that late game. So like this build caps out on 7, and most builds will as well, and that means that actually you end up being the aggressor in the Django matchup quite a lot of the time. It can depend on like how the game plays out and how each of the opening hands are, because both decks kind of looking to kill around the same time anyways. But it just depends on like who opens a bunch of surprise strikes or who opens a much wider unit spread in terms of the early turns. That can often determine like who's the aggressor in the matchup, rather than it just naturally being one deck or another. Although I will generally say that I think Quinlan is generally the aggressive deck in the matchup anyways, because it doesn't have that top end to play with. And so the 1-drops again really help with that. If you're able to get a 1-drop down into Django to ping out their X1, and then you're able to follow it up with a second 1-drop and just start beating them down for 4 damage per turn, plus any other units that you play. It can become really, really strong, and it means that you're able to like start looking at finishing the game around the 5 or 6 resource turn, which is where you want to finish it ideally, because that's just before their Devastators will start coming down with like triple Dark Raid, sneak attack, and then being hard casted as well. And the Devastator is real scary for this matchup because it's 9 damage swinging at your base every turn, plus the 4 indirect that can also tap down your board, and you know, that card is crazy. So that's the reason why I wanted to play 1-drops. I really wanted to keep the deck a little bit more lower to the ground in the Django matchup, so I had the ability to go wide into them, because obviously going tall into them is generally not great, because if they can grab initiative, they can just tap down your one big unit and your turn is kind of just over. So going wide I feel like was the better strategy. It also allows better access for Plo Koon in the matchup, which is a super valuable card, because it is one of the few cards in the game that actually just one-shots the Django leader in combination with Quinlan Vos, if you're able to get that raid 3 online. The fact that you deploy on the Plo Koon turn is super important, because it obviously gives you that extra unit that you can play with to enable the coordinate, but having these 1-drops as well allows you to obviously enable that because the deck's trying to go wider. Going on into the actual 2-drop lineup, I played 3 Sabine, I played 3 L37, and I played 1 Crafty Smuggler. Sabine was the 2-drop that I was actually least confident in, but I really wanted to keep it in the build because it is such a good 2-drop into anything that doesn't just ping Tarkintown turn 1. So any non-Django matchup, I really want to see it, and any like just non-Tarkintown in general. But the main fear into Django was that if I open with this, and they open with ISB Agent and ping it down, and then Tarkintown, and then drop another 1-drop, that's when it becomes real scary. There's a lot of kind of player reading that you have to do in the Django matchup to figure out whether they're gonna be on the 1-drop versions or not, and whether they're like siding into 1-drops is something that I considered a lot of Djangos would be doing, as well as like just either not playing them or realizing that they're not so good into the matchup once they see that you're also running 1-drops. Because a lot of the time Djangos are just going to pass into you on turn 1 as well, because they realize that they have the top end that I talked about earlier, so they're actually better off in the late game, so they're happy to just skip turn 1. There were times when that did work in my favor because I didn't open turn 1 plays, so I was able to just skip turn 1 entirely and go to turn 2. But yeah, a lot of the time they're passing into you and you're not able to get that ping off, but you would still like to play a unit because you're the aggressor in the matchup. So ideally you open with like the shielded guys to have insulation against that kind of play, or you open the double 1-drops, because if you open double 1-drop and they look to ISB Agent plus 1-drop you, you can still get at least some value from your ping on the second 1-drop play, because you can ping down the ISB Agent. And whilst that might not be the ideal Tarkintown target, it allows your soldier to favorably trade into the ISB Agent. And it's valuable to have a unit on 1 less health throughout the game, of course. So I wanted to opt for the early 2-drop shielded guys, obviously to have insulation against the ping Tarkintown decks. They're also great into Django for more reasons than that, because obviously the shield is great because it can't be tapped down, but they also favorably trade into any Crafty Smugglers that the Django player might play if you're able to get that ping off. Overall, I'm playing, I think this is 13 early drops, so 6 1-drops and then 7 2-drops. 13 early plays. I was on 12 for a while. This Crafty Smuggler is actually the 50th card in the list. And I realized I wanted to have 1 extra turn 1 play, and I was even considering upping it to 2 Crafty Smugglers and trying to find space for that, because I'm mulliganing very, very aggressively in this deck. There were a lot of games into Django where I opened 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop Plo Koon, and I was throwing the hand back. Django naturally is a very high roll deck because of cards like Triple Dark Raid and like sneak attack plus a unit is burning through their hand, so they don't have many options to play with. They also have to find that combination of cards. And like the one drop versions, they're burning through their hands super quickly, so they're relying on their top decks. There's a lot of like high roll potential in the Django matchup that you need to consider, because there are some times where you just can't play around certain like high rolls that they might have, and you just have to write them off. But the reason why I'm talking about this is because Django is naturally going to be a high roll matchup, so you have to increase your odds of being able to high roll into them, by just like hard mulliganing for what you think you'll be able to counter. And so if you get the read that they're on the one drop versions, if you think they're that kind of player, or if you've seen them in the game 1 or game 2, then you want to be looking for like double one drops, or you want to be looking for some combination of 2 drops and 1 drops. A lot of the time what I was looking for was, what felt like the safest play was a 2 drop shielded, plus another 2 drop plus a 1 drop, because then if they open pass into you, you can still open with the 2 drop shielded, and that provides you safety against pretty much any of their openers. And then you're able to follow it up with a 2 drop to ping out their 2 drop shielded if they open with a Crafty Smuggler, or if they open with ISB Agent plus Greedo, then you can follow it up with a 1 drop to ping out the Greedo, plus a 2 drop to then fill out the curve, and from there you can go super wide. So that was kind of the ideal opener that I was looking for a lot of the time. There was some like flexibility on that depending on how many 1 drops I saw them playing throughout the game, but like generally that was what I was looking for. And the thing with a lot of the Django builds that I saw was that I realized that they're likely going to be side decking some of the 1 drops, because they're not so good in the mirror matchup of Django, because, you know, Django naturally has so many pings. Things like the Death Star Stormtroopers and the First Order Stormtroopers and the Greedos are just getting pinged out on turn 2 every single game, or even turn 1 with the ISB agent. So I realized that there's a strong possibility that a lot of the Djangos are sideboarding the 1 drop versions for any matchup that isn't Django. So especially in like games 2, I was looking for the 1 drops a little bit harder. Even if I didn't see them in game 1, then looking for the 1 drops in games 2 and 3 were much better. And in game 1, I was mainly looking for that kind of opener that I mentioned before, because I feel like the scariest thing that they can open with is ISB Agent plus Greedo. And if they're not running very many 1 drops in their main board, if they're mainly sideboarding them, they're much less likely to have the ISB agent plus another 1 drop opener. And that was kind of generally what I was more scared of. And so I was much more content in game 1, like keeping hands of just 2 drop shielded plus like a 3 drop, because I realized that even if they just open ISB agent, that's absolutely fine. I'm much less scared of that than I am ISB agent plus another 1 drop. And it's the same logic with the Sabine as well. I was happier keeping a Sabine hand in games 1 than I was games 2 and 3, because if they ISB agent ping this and then just TARKINTOWN it, but they don't follow it up with another 1 drop, I am absolutely fine with that trade, because they burn TARKINTOWN, but their turn 1 play is a 1-3, and then turn 2 I can follow it up with like going wider or establishing a 3 drop that they can't then TARKINTOWN, and it just becomes much easier. So in game 1, I'm not looking to like specifically high roll them as much, but in games 2 and 3, you're much harder digging for the 1 drops, I think. I know I've been rambling about this Django matchup a lot, but it's kind of the main thing that I was trying to prepare for. So this is all the stuff I was trying to consider here. But yeah, hopefully that all makes sense. And then if they're opening with ISB agent plus a 1 drop, you ideally want to have a 1 drop of your own as insurance to ping out the second 1 drop that they play once it comes to that turn 2. And that's why I'm looking for like ideally a 2 drop to play on turn 1 into a 1 drop and a 2 drop to play on turn 2, because it kind of gives me safety against any of their openers. Unless I'm really, really sure that they're on double 1 drop versions. Again, especially in games 2 and 3, that would be more likely. in which case I'm looking for my own double 1-drops to try and like put pressure on them back and have the ability to counter any 1-drops that they play. And it ideally, again, looking for extreme high roll, you want to be opening into a matchup where you're sure that they're going to be on a double 1-drop opener. It's really nice to see double 1-drop turn 1 into a 1-drop and a 2-drop turn 2, so that you can ping out potentially both their 1-drops, although one of them may be an ISB agent, but that will generally be the first 1-drop they play, and they might pass into you, which means you have to open with a 1-drop, they play the ISB agent ping, you play a 1-drop to ping their ISB agent, they play their second 1-drop, and then you can use your third 1-drop to counter their second 1-drop on turn 2. So it really becomes a battle of 1-drops a lot of the time, and a battle of ping Tarkintown enables. But yeah, that's generally the reason why I went on those 1-drops. And also the flexibility of being on 13 opening plays rather than just 12 meant that in some matchups I was able to side out one of my earlier plays, or a couple of earlier plays. Like against Hard Control, I'm siding out the Cartel Turncoats. Against Django, a lot of the time I sided out one of the Sabines because it wasn't that strong as an opener. I'd much rather just like aggressively mulligan for the rest. But also the fact that I had that one extra turn 1 play meant that my aggressive mulligans were much less frequently punished by just like bricking. Going on to the 3-drops, we got 3 Cassian. There's no way you play less than 3 Cassian in this deck in my eyes. Against Django, they have to ping this twice, or they have to Daring Raid it and then Tarkintown it, or they have to ram the Crafty Smuggler into it and Tarkintown it. And most of the time you're pinging out the shield from the Crafty Smuggler anyways, either on turns 1 or 2. 2 Ezra. I had this guy at 3 for the longest time, but I needed to cut him for more space. This guy is really nice, but he isn't so great in the Django matchups and in the Tarkintown matchups in general. A lot of Djangos were saving their Tarkintown because I had good protection against it in the early turns with the early shieldeds or the double 1-drops. A lot of them were saving their Tarkintown until like turns 3 or 4, and a lot of the time Ezra is a Tarkintown magnet because one ping, he gets tapped down, he doesn't get value from his on-attack skill, nor does he get to push damage, and then he instantly gets Tarkintowned. And that's not really what you want from a 3-drop. There's a reason why we play the 3 Cassian over the 3 Ezra, and it's mainly just because of that +1 health. It's a really, really big breakpoint into those matchups. And then I was on 3 Millennium Falcon and 2 Red 5. Millennium Falcon is just great. It gave me so many lethals throughout the day. And you don't really want to play it on turn 2, but because this build is so much lower to the ground with the 1-drops, with additional 2-drops, and with quite a wide spread of 3-drops as well, spending the 1 mana throughout the game, especially in the earlier turns like turn 3, turn 4, once you've played it on turn 2, isn't so bad, because a lot of the times it actually ends up filling out your curve for like turn 4 you're playing like, or turn 3 even, you end up just playing like a 2-drop or 1-drop and keeping your Falcon on the board, or playing another 3-drop, because there are a lot of games where you just like don't see 4-drops until much later. So playing the Millennium Falcon on turn 2 is not the worst for this build. Red 5 is insane in this deck. I really love this card. The main issue that I have with it is that, again, it's a 3-mana 3/4. So it just gets pinged Tarkintown, but also because it's a 3-mana 3/4 in space, it just gets traded into by Elite P38 without getting any value. So against a lot of the Django matchups, I was just siding this down to 1 copy as well. There's an argument that you just side it out entirely against Django, but into any matchup that wasn't Django, or any matchup where I was able to stick this guy on the board for even just a turn, it got such huge value. But yeah, against things like Django, the Falcon tends to be the better space unit, because at least if you play it when they've already started tapping out or like used their Django leader skill, then you're guaranteed to at least get a swing from it rather than just having it die. For the 4-drops, I'm on a full suite of Kira and Ahsoka. Ahsoka is such an insane card that this deck got. This card is super, super nice. especially because Django doesn't play that many events. And the events that they do play, they really want to be keeping, like Triple Dark Raid, like Sneak Attack. And also because Django is like burning through its hand super early with these 1-drop builds, Ahsoka becomes much, much stronger as well, because of the fact that they're going to have much fewer cards that they can choose from, and therefore the cards that they do choose from are more likely to be a unit or a strong event that they'd much rather keep, but they can't afford to have their unit get tapped down at the time. There were often times where like this card was just saving me from getting lethaled because the unit that they have up is presenting lethal damage, or like is presenting lethal damage if they have the surprise strike, and so then they're either forced to discard the surprise strike or discard a unit from their hand that isn't the surprise strike, and then they tap the unit anyways. And then Kira is obviously insane because, again, with these smaller hand sizes, because people are opening double 1-drops and that kind of thing, it just becomes much stronger because they have fewer plays once it gets to that 4-5 resource turn. And you can just call out whatever the one play they have in their hand is, or if they don't even have a very strong play for that turn, you just call out like Triple Dark Raid, War Juggernaut, Devastator. Those kind of cards just got called by Kira a lot, and this card like won me so many games just off of being able to call Devastator like a couple of turns in advance, and then that means they can't Triple Dark Raid Devastator, they can't sneak attack it, and then once they get to 8 resources they can't even play it. So yeah, this card was like absolutely insane. Once I got into the later rounds, there were a lot of Djangos that started saving TARKINTOWN plus Daring Raid to deal with Kira's, or like just generally saving TARKINTOWN plus like some of their units that they'd bash into it to deal with Kira, which I think is a very, very smart play. But even so, this card is like super strong, and just giving you that hand knowledge alone is amazing. The one issue that I did have with this was the fact that the Cartel Turncoat does obviously have the bounty that lets your opponent draw a card, and that in theory has some like pretty bad anti-synergy with the deck, because the deck is naturally trying to control the opponent's hand with a lot of the top end stuff, and just generally throughout the game. And so giving them that extra card can be super relevant, again, especially in the Django matchup where they are emptying their hand super quickly. It gives them that one extra card, which there were times where I'd Kira them, see that call out their only play, and then they'd kill my Cartel Turncoat and they'd top deck Triple Dark Raid, and that really hurt. I'm pretty sure that happened in the top 8 match that I ended up losing, which sucked a little bit. But yeah, there's definitely some small anti-synergy there, but I really, really didn't want to run another early space unit to like replace the Cartel Turncoat, because I really wanted to have a 1-drop space unit that had decent stats to trade with, so that I could facilitate running 6 1-drops, as well as keeping my 2-drops all very strong into Django, or making sure that one of those 2-drops was Sabine, because that card is just insane. So I really didn't have like space to run 3 1-drops to replace the Cartel Turncoat, and then 3 2-drops to replace the fact that it was a space unit that I could play early. So Cartel Turncoat still felt like the best option, even with the slight downside that they do get to draw cards off of it. And a lot of the time in the Django matchup, because you're trying to be the aggressor, them drawing cards is not as bad as you might think, because, you know, if you end up with 2 surprise strikes in your hand, it doesn't really matter how many cards they draw, you're still just going to put 6 damage on their base from hand, and then eventually they run out of health, right? So going on to the top end, we've got 3 Plo Koon. This card is just insane. Like, this card killed a lot of Django leaders throughout the day. Again, the Django flip turn is like actually super fun to navigate, because both of your leaders are flipping on that turn. And oftentimes you both have like a couple of units that you can swing with to action stall or trade into each other with, using Django's ability to tap down, but then they have to use an action to flip before they can start tapping down other stuff. And so bluffing Plo Koon or holding it in your hand if you actually have it is really, really important on that turn. It's very important to bluff this card by either maintaining 2 units, even if you lose a little bit of damage, and holding up your resources just to delay that Django flip as much as you can. There were a lot of Djangos that just started passing into me to wait until I played stuff, because they didn't want their Django leader getting one-shot by Plo Koon. And there were a lot of Django players that just flipped into me and I freely one-shot their leader, and those games felt much, much easier from my perspective. Especially if they don't have TARKINTOWN live, they really struggle to kill the Plo Koon. It often takes like a Ruthless Raider ping plus another ping from another source, or they have to wait until they get to Devastator, or like burn a sneak attack or a triple dark raid to try and find it. So yeah, Plo Koon is absolutely insane. There were a lot of Django games where I had this in hand, but I didn't. But they started passing into me after they'd gone through all of their actions, and I didn't want to, lose the 5 resources just to not let them flip that turn. So I'd end up spending my resources. They'd flip and hit me for 3, but then I'd get to claim and just immediately one-shot their leader on 6 resources. And that oftentimes was even stronger than just one-shotting their leader on 5 resources, because even though I take 3 more damage, because I'm the aggressor in the matchup, my health is a little bit less relevant unless they have been pushing a lot of damage throughout the game already. But their health, I'm much more concerned about their health total than mine in that matchup. And so being able to one-shot their leader on the 6 resource turn is super, super huge, because it means that they're not then able to tap down the rest of my board. And because I've got Coordinate live, I've definitely got some semblance of a board that I can start swinging in. So there were a couple of games against Django where, even though I had like maybe 1 or 2 swings available, I was just claiming initiative a little bit earlier so that I had the ability to one-shot their leader on 6 resource, so that I could then just swing the rest of my board in. Because another real big issue with the initiative on that specific turn is that if they grab initiative and their leader has lived, they can just drop War Juggernaut, and that just taps down your whole board and skips your turn, to be honest, which real bad. A lot of the time, if I didn't have the Plo Koon to deal with their leader and I wasn't able to grab initiative, Kira was calling War Juggernaut, because that card is terrifying, even if just hard casted from hand. But a lot of the game against Django comes down to either how much damage can you push early on with like just drawing surprise strikes and blasters, or how efficiently can you deal with their leader without them pushing enough damage onto you to make it a real threat. But a lot of the time, if you can deal with their leader, then you have like a couple of turns of being able to push some really good damage, and also you have some really efficient ways by that point to deal with some of their bigger threats to allow you to win the race. So it really does all come down to that leader flip turn and like navigating that a lot of the time. And then for the top end, we got 3 Han Solos. I still wanted to keep 3 of this in the main, even though we're in like a pretty aggressive format right now. This card, like against Han Yellow, it just comes down to who has more of these if it gets to the late game. So it's super important to have 3. This card, there were times where I was one-shotting Django leaders with Han because we'd got to that point. This card can one-shot the War Juggernaut as well, again, if you have your leader deployed for either of those. A big reason why I wanted to keep this card at 3 copies is because it's a 7 cost, and in the Django matchup, you're able to just force throw this out of your own hand to one-shot their leader, or to one-shot Devastator or War Juggernaut or anything like that. And that was a huge play throughout the day, especially because everyone is playing around Plo Koon. A lot of the time what you can do is force them to start passing into you if they don't have enough actions to action stall. You get all of your swings through for free. You drop a 4-drop, ideally Kira, so that you can call out whatever their next turn play is. But Ahsoka is fine too, and you can drop Ahsoka a little bit earlier because you want to get value from the ability to rest one of their units. And then that'll leave you with the 1 resource, so that their next action is generally, oh, they don't have Plo Koon, I'm just going to flip Django. And then you just spend the 1 to force throw and kill the Django. That can be a really, really big play. But that is all the units in the deck. Going on to the spells and other various things. I'm running 3 Hotshot Blasters, There was a really long time where I was on 2 copies of this card, and I was really struggling to find space for the third, but I really wanted the third. I managed to find the space. This card is super important. Again, the Django matchup, you want to be the aggressor. You want to find as many pumps as possible, so it's important to have more pumps in your deck. So that's why I wanted to run the 3 hotshots. Also, because this version is running the 1-drops and is running a higher density of 2-drops, and just general like early plays, Smuggle is a super important keyword to have in this list, because my hand is actually going to deplete pretty quickly in a lot of matchups. And so on the, like, once we get to like the 5 or 6 resource turn, then things can get a little bit clunky. So there are a lot of times where just being able to drop a blaster on your deploy turn is good enough, because again, it gives you that action efficiency, which is especially important into Django, and it means that, like, even if they deploy their leader and swing, you're able to grab initiative and just start pushing damage. If you get this on your leader, you swing 5 damage, then next turn you hopefully like drop a surprise strike once you've got initiative, and you just push more damage. Like 13 damage over those 2 actions is half their base total, and that's exactly what you're looking for. Speaking of which, 3 surprise strike. Again, we're looking to be the aggressor in the Django matchup. Unfortunately, there's no real like clean way to one-shot Django leader with these cards, because all of our early drops before turn 5 or resource 5 are maximum 3 attack, which is a little bit frustrating. There was worlds where I thought about running cards like K2SO, but that just gets pinged TARKINTOWN, which really sucks. Yeah, you wanna have a lot of pumps to go face, especially into Django. Going on to the kind of obvious cards, we've also got 3 Force Throw, because the card is insane in this deck, and your leader is a Force unit, and you play like good Force units in your main deck naturally, like Ahsoka. I was still on 2 Spark of Rebellion in the main. This was like the biggest question mark going into the event for me. I'll show you the rest of the cards as well. So the 2 Waylays are kind of standard, but the main discussion I wanted to have over these last couple of cards was these 4. I was on 2 Spark, 1 Commandeer, and 1 Electromagnetic Pulse. Initially, for a while, I was on 2 Commandeer and then 2 Electromagnetic Pulse in the sideboard. Literally in the car on the way to the event, one of my mates was recommending that I split the 2 and 2 ratio that I had into a 1 and 1 ratio in both the main and side, just to reduce diminishing returns, and because each card has like different use cases outside of the Django matchup. So there are some worlds where like you draw these in other matchups and one of them is bad but one of them is good, and so it's better to have the 1 and 1 split in the main and then the 1 and 1 split in the side than the 2 and 2 split, which I definitely agreed with. And the fact that these were a 1 and 1 split rather than just like 2 Commandeer or 2 EMP came up a lot throughout the day. The main question mark that I had was the 2 Spark of Rebellion. This card just gets sided out against Django for me personally. I think it's the weakest card in the matchup in the deck, and there was a big possibility where I thought about like just chucking this in the sideboard and boosting each of these guys up to 2 and 2. And in hindsight, I kind of think that that's what I should have done. My game ones against Django were still fine without the second copies of each of these. Like, these are actually not necessary cards in the matchup to win it, but they are very, very helpful, of course. But yeah, the game ones, I think I lost quite a few game ones against Django, and I think these would have helped against that a lot. The reason why I wanted to keep the Sparks in the main board was because I was very conscious that hard control is very, well, not very good into Django, but it's pretty good into Django, and it's good enough for people to play it. Especially in Europe, we have a lot of hard control players in general. So I didn't want to just auto lose game 1 into hard control, so I wanted to keep the Sparks in for that reason. And also because, like, generally it's good to have a higher density of hand control stuff, especially targeted, because it all starts to add up throughout the game, right? But in hindsight, I think just cutting these into the side And hard main decking for Django was definitely the play, because I knew I was going to play a lot of Django throughout the day, and I think I ended up playing like 7 or 8 Djangos, whereas I only played one hard control matchup. But I was at least right on the hard control call, because it did end up winning the event. So I was at least right that it did play pretty well into Django there. So the logic and the reasoning was there, but I don't think it was the right logic or reasoning, unfortunately. I think just like kind of auto losing the game 1 into hard control and then hard sideboarding for it was probably a better play, because it was likely that I'd only play like 1 hard control matchup throughout the entire weekend anyways. Going into the sideboard for the anti-Django stuff, I've got 2 Bamboozle, 1 EMP and 1 Commandeer. Like I said, with these 2, they're just going to 2 copies each in the Django matchup, and then the 2 Bamboozle is super nice because of turns where you tap out and then they tap out to like TDR Devastator you or TDR War Juggernaut you, and then you have that out to just tap it down. And it came up a lot today, or came up a lot throughout the weekend, and it's also got the obvious added benefit of being upgrade removal as well. I was running 2 Jam Communications in the sideboard. Again, this was a real big question mark for me. I was also had the 3rd Spark of Rebellion in the sideboard. I wasn't sure what I wanted instead of these 2 slots. Like, I was looking for pretty much anything that was going to give me better matchups that wasn't these cards, but I couldn't find anything personally. I like the idea of pillage, but I don't think that I had enough like hand control stuff to facilitate pillage, and I didn't have enough space to run like pillage and all of this stuff, so I just went for all of the targeted hand control instead to help me against hard control and just control in general. They were nice. They didn't come up very often, but they came in maybe like 1 or 2 matches, and they were fine, I guess. Again, like, I played a lot of Django and just like general meta aggro stuff, so the sideboard for the control matchups did not come up too often. And then the last couple cards was 1 Mace Windu and 2 Cham Syndulla. Again, the Chams I think came in 1, maybe 2 matchups. I didn't even end up playing much Han 1 throughout the day. I think I played 1, and then I played the 1 hard control matchup, which this card came in because it's a kind of pseudo drawer card, but it's also just another unit that I can play that is threatening. And then the 1 Mace Windu was really strong throughout the day. The main reason for running it was because if I play against any Han Yellow and the games go a little bit longer, like I mentioned before, it comes down to whom has more Han 7 drops. But because I'm playing Quinlan, this is effectively ambushing for 6. So this can ambush, kill a Han 7 drop, and then live on 1 health and restand. And because Han Yellow doesn't have too many pings, the best they can do is like exhaust it or bounce it or trade something else into it. And so this kind of means that I, in that matchup, have like 4 copies of the Han 7 drop, which is super valuable for that kind of matchup. Again, it only really matters if it goes longer, which my matchup against the Han Yellow didn't end up going too long. It didn't end up reaching that point where we were just battling out Han 7 drops for the game. But it ended up coming up in a couple of other matchups as well. Just anything where the games were going like slightly longer, this was really nice for. And this was able to like sneak the occasional 5 damage to base after the value trade from the ambush as well. So that is the entire list, and I hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown of that. I'll just quickly go through my matchups throughout the day as well, and throughout the weekend in general. So day 1, when I went 8-1 overall, my first matchup was against a Django TARKINTOWN, which is not what I wanted to see first round, to be honest. And I ended up losing game 1, but I managed to take it back games 2 and 3. Games 2 and 3 were pretty unlucky for him, I have to be honest. Game 2, he did open all 3 triple dark raids in like the early turns, but one of them hit like a lurking TIE Phantom, I think, and one of them completely whiffed as well. So whilst it should have been a free game for him opening 3 triple dark raids, I feel like they just hit like absolutely nothing. So it was very lucky from my part there. And then I think game 3 he saw like 1 or 2 triple dark raids, but the first one he played hit like a Kylo's TIE silencer. So again, super unlucky for him. In game 1 he did like I felt like I was in complete control of the board. I had like 3 units, had killed his leader, and had like a pretty decent hand to follow up with. And he just like triple dark raided into Devastator, swung 9 at my base, and then bounced it back and sneak attacked it in next turn and just killed me. And I was like, oh, that was really cool, well played. So like sometimes that's the thing with the Django matchup, is it's a super high rolling matchup on both sides because of the way that I've built the deck. And sometimes they out high roll you because of the nature of Django, and sometimes they don't because they lose the high roll, and then sometimes you can out high roll them as well. So round 2 was against a Sabine ECL, which I managed to take 2-0. Game 1 we did the whole like, he has initiative, he pings both bases, I pass, he claims, and we just skip turn 1 because he doesn't want to lose his turn 1 play to TARKINTOWN. But I think I had like a Cassian to follow up with, and was able to just take control of the board pretty cleanly. And then from there, like I think I used Kira that game to check his hand on 5 resources because I was a little concerned about an ECL Poe to deal with my leader flip. And I looked at his hand and it was Battlefield Marine, the 2-mana 3/2 ship, and then 2 for a cause I believe in. So I just called for a cause so that I wouldn't get like threatened into lethal range over the next couple of turns, and just to throw off his curve so that he was just playing like 2/2 drops on the turn, and I was able to flip and do all of my normal like pinging plus TARKINTOWN stuff with the multiple pings you get from Quinlan to just clean up the board and race him. Game 2 I opened the double 1-drop opener and was just able to race him. I outputted way more damage than he could. And because we're both on 25 health, it's an actual race between the two of us, which is really cool. And I was just able to kill him on my deploy turn because he didn't have the damage to match me. I think I was on like 12 or 13 damage by the time he died, which is insane. Like the double 1-drop opener to just race them was feeling crazy throughout the whole day. Round 3 was against Han 1 Yellow, which I managed to take 2-0 as well. To be honest, I don't remember very much about these games. I think I was able to resolve Plo Koon on one of his leader deploys, which is obviously huge. And I think in game 2 I might have been able to either bamboozle his leader or just like force throw it. Maybe, in fact, it might have even been a surprise strike that I burned to just one-shot it before he could swing through. Kira was again insane in that game. There was a turn where I Kira'd him, and I think it was on the 4 resource turn. His hand was like a 3-drop, a 7-drop, and then 2 cunnings, and I just called cunning and kind of bricked him out of the game from there. And then in game 2, I played Kira on his 6 resource turn, but he just used his Han leader to ramp to 7. And I checked his hand, and it was double Enfys Nest. So I just called Enfys Nest, and he skipped his turn, and from there it's kind of just GG. So again, Kira like hard carries some games for no real reason sometimes. Round 4 was actually a mirror match, but I don't think he was on 1-drops, and both games I opened double 1-drop, so I just double 1-dropped him to his 2-drop, and then I was able to follow it up with a 2-drop of my own to ping out his 2-drop. And just start racing him because he didn't get any value from his leader, and he didn't get any ping TARKINTOWN resolved. So yeah, the double 1-drop in some of these matchups was just insane enough that I could race people. Round 5 was actually on stream. Organized Play Events ended up streaming the entire tournament, so if you guys want to check that out, then go check out their Twitch. And I was against a Guy Yellow, which unfortunately for him is a really hard matchup for Guy Yellow from what I've seen, because I can just naturally ping out all of his shields, which means his leader doesn't really have an ability, and his leader's also flipping on 6, which for an aggro deck is not ideal. A lot of the time, Guy Yellow is like trying to use their leader flip to finish the game, but if they've not been getting the +1 attack value for the entire game, then it's really hard for them to get to that point. Also, the fact that eventually I'm going to be able to TARKINTOWN one of their units as well just gives me like more board presence than they're going to have. I was a little bit concerned because I did open both games with a 2-2 shielded, when I would have much rather seen Sabine in the matchup, because he opened both games with Krennic, and I was very worried that he was going to follow it up with the turn 2 shuttle to take my shield, put it back on the Krennic, and then I can't value trade into his 2-drop, and I can't even trade into his 2-drop, and he can just start pushing damage. And I also can't ping out the shuttle because it's a 4-drop, so I'll be playing a turn behind. So I was very concerned about that opening, but luckily he didn't see it either game. But I would have much rather seen Sabine in the opening turns for that matchup. Round 6 was against Django TARKINTOWN, which I managed to take 2-1. This was actually against one of the swoop racers, Beton. If you guys have watched any Star Wars YouTube, you probably have heard of the swoop racers because they're very, very strong Polish players. And I actually played Beton before in the Birmingham event when I was playing CAD TARKINTOWN, and he was again on Django Red, but this was before set 4. That was, back then it was a very, very hard matchup for CAD, and I just managed to take it. And again, he was on Django TARKINTOWN today, and I just managed to take it 2-1 as well. It was a super, super close match in general, and like generally the Django matchups are super close. Like that's just the nature of the matchup, is there's oftentimes going to be like 1 or 2 actions in it, unless one of you super high rolls, then it's really hard to come back from. But yeah, great games against Beton regardless. Round 7, I was against Anakin Colossus, and this guy, I can't for the life of me remember his name, unfortunately. But I played him in the Manchester Planetary Qualifier in my top 8 match. He was playing, I think, a Sarge Red back then, which was a very cool deck. But I managed to beat him in that as well. And so we got the rematch, and I managed to win that 2-0 as well. Anakin Colossus felt like a pretty decent matchup. I've not tested it before, but just from those games alone, like his opening of things like C-3PO or R2-D2 doesn't trade very well into my shielded guys. And if he opens a C-3PO, I'm able to ping TARKINTOWN it a little bit later on, after on turn 2, if I'm able to drop another 2-drop, because he was passing into me. But like generally, if you're able to keep Anakin's board clear, and then start attacking their hand when they've started with 1 less card in their hand, it's really a fine matchup. And the hand control is obviously really potent against them, and Quinlan is naturally very good at taking control of the board, because that's what the early game of the that's what the early game plan of the deck is meant to do with the whole TARKINTOWN, and then you just transition into hand controlling their answers out of their hand. So the general like game plan of Quinlan naturally is pretty good into Anakin Colossus, I feel like. So like it's a bit of a rough one for him. Round 8 was against another Django TARKINTOWN. This was a bit of an interesting build of Django from what I remember. There were like a couple of cards that I'd not seen very many people play before. Things like the new Boba 5-drop pilot. And I think there was another card as well, but I can't remember what it was. It felt like a little, like he had a couple of ground units in there to control the ground arena, which as well ended up being pretty annoying to deal with. Oh, that was it. He was running, I think, some form of smuggle cards, whether it was Jetpack or Hotshot, I can't remember. But definitely something to buff up his leader. Which was, yeah, really annoying just because he was able to push so much more damage onto me. And it also meant that my hand destruction wasn't as potent against him because he was saving cards in hand by using the smuggle. So yeah, that was pretty scary. I managed to win it 2-0. I think in the last game of that match, I was able to basically live on 1 health above the lethal that he was threatening, by waylaying back the Boba pilot that he had on board. And I was on 21 damage, and he had the 7th Fleet Defender as his last swing, so I had to hope he didn't see a pump. And luckily he didn't. His only play was to put the Boba pilot onto the 7th Fleet Defender, which I was then able to exhort. Oh no, I think I used my last 2 cards in hand to force throw myself to kill it. And then I was able to set up exact lethal with a Hotshot Blaster. I'm pretty sure is how that game ended. But I think in one of the games he had a pretty unlucky triple Dark Raid where he either whiffed or only saw a Kylo's TIE Silencer, which was able to swing that game massively into my favor as well. So that was pretty lucky there. But yeah, managed to take the match 2-0. And then round 9, the only round that I lost on day 1 was against another Django TARKINTOWN. This one being Sip, the other member of the Swoop Racers. So again, another very strong player who obviously went undefeated throughout the whole day. Ended up losing this one 1-2. I was honestly kind of happy enough just taking a game off him. I think I managed to win game 1, which for me was starting to feel pretty rare for these Django matchups. A lot of the Django matchups on day 1, I ended up just losing game 1 and then bringing it back. But the opposite happened to me in this matchup. But yeah, it was a super fun match regardless. It was very fun in general just playing against good Django TARKINTOWN players because of the whole like do you pass turn 1 situation, where do your pings end up, when do you use TARKINTOWN. Like it was really, really back and forth throughout the whole day, which was really cool. And like figuring out who had the hand that could race the other person, to try and like just start jamming surprise strikes to base on 4 resources or 5 resources, to try and close out the game was really cool. And then day 2, so ended day 1 8-1. Day 2 I ended up first round playing against the Bosk Blue player, who was the guy who ended up winning the event. I unfortunately lost this match 1-2 again. This, I feel like, should be a pretty favoured matchup for Quinlan generally, but I didn't see a spark of rebellion throughout the entire best of 3, and like those best of 3s went on for long because it was Bosk Blue. So that was really unfortunate. I did see some form of jam communications after sideboard, but it wasn't enough, and there were times where I really wanted to take out units or upgrades, where I just wasn't able to pick them because I was not using Spark, I was using jam. So that was unfortunate, and I feel like generally that should be a pretty favoured matchup, but that's the way it goes sometimes. There was a turn on game 3 where I had him on 24 damage, and I was able to set up a potential lethal with Millennium Falcon plus a Cassian in my smuggle, but he had just established a Snoke, which I had then drew no answers for like 2 turns. Even with TARKINTOWN still live as well, there was just no way that I could deal with the Snoke and then set up the lethal, which was really unfortunate. And then he started healing with top targets and stuff, and we were not able to get there. But he ended up winning the whole event, so obviously congrats to him. And it was, regardless, some very fun games as well. Round 11, I played against another Django TARKINTOWN, which I managed to take 2-0. I think this one didn't end up passing turn 1s into me, which definitely makes the matchup easier. I can't actually remember. Maybe it wasn't this guy, maybe it was another guy. But there was somebody throughout the day who didn't pass turn 1s into me, and that definitely helped with the early turns because it just meant I got the early ping. But like, you know, some people aren't going to recognize that Quinlan is actually the aggressor in the matchup because it's a pretty weird thing to say. I feel like a lot of people see Django as the aggressive deck in most matchups in general, so it makes sense that they'd assume that they would be the aggressor in this matchup, especially when Quinlan like runs all the hand destruction stuff normally. Round 12, I played against another Django TARKINTOWN, and this was actually Buku or Zeb, who again is another PQ winner, just like a couple of the guys I played on day 1 that I mentioned. And he won the PQ with Sabine, but he's been playing Django TARKINTOWN for a really long time. He even played Boba Red back when Boba was a legal leader that you could play. He played Boba Red, I think it was in set 2, and we played in one of the PQs there, and he was my last round pairing in that PQ. and I lost that one, and it pushed me out to 17th when I was almost gonna make. I was gonna make top 8 if I'd won that round, so that was real unfortunate. So I got the rematch here, and I was managed to take it 2-1. They were super close games. Again, with all the Django Tarkintowns, they were all really close. But these ones especially because I know Buku. I've played a bunch of games against him before. Super strong player. And yeah, it was unfortunate that again we had to pair in what wasn't technically the last round, but was kind of the last round because everyone on the top tables in the last round just intentionally drew to guarantee the top 8. So yeah, unfortunately we had to pair again for the last real round of the tournament. And like I say, in round 13 I intentionally drew because I was guaranteed to make top 8 if I did, so it just made sense. It's an interesting addition that they've made to the tournaments. I don't know if I like it or not personally, but if it's there, then I guess we should use it, right? And then, like I said, in top 8, I got knocked out by another Django Tarkintown. This guy, I believe, was the guy who ended up placing second. So, like, all throughout the day, I played really strong players, which I'm very happy with. Being able to do as well as I did. And being able to secure the World's Day 2, well, World's Day 1 skip, the Quinlan Showcase being the only Quinlan in the top 8. These games, again, were super close. I managed to win game 2. I think there was a world... Game 3 was, like, much more out of my control. I don't think there was very much I could have done in game 3. Game 2 was very close. I had him on 21 damage with my leader potentially able to swing, which he was then able to exhaust because I had the hot shot in the smuggle row. And then he had just enough attacks that I didn't have answers for that he was able to then push a return lethal before I got the initiative. I think with a sneak attack plus some kind of ship, which I didn't have like an EMP or a bamboozle or anything to deal with, unfortunately. I think my only out was playing Ahsoka, which I ended up going for, but he ditched the surprise strike and then still had some form of bonus damage, like a daring raid, to push the lethal with the swing. So I was really just banking on him only having units in hand to try and tap down his last attacker to stop the attack plus the potential burn damage afterwards. But in game 1, I think there was a world where the one indirect damage that I placed from the stormtrooper that I killed should have gone somewhere else, and I think that could have saved one of my units, which could have potentially changed the game. Again, it's like such a small thing that it's really hard to tell if that kind of thing matters, and it would have changed the whole rest of the game because it was on like 5 resource when the game went to like 7 or 8 resources. So really hard to tell if that was the case or not. But yeah, potentially could have gone another way if I'd played slightly differently. So again, it's great to see that like this game is so skill intensive that that kind of thing potentially matters. And I'd love to know if that would have changed anything in the past as well. Game 2, I managed to win just by dropping an early enough Kira that I could check his hand, see that he didn't really have any valuable plays, and then call Devastator and just block off his triple dark raid, sneak attack, Devastator stuff for like 3 turns in a row, which was enough to just get me to the lethal range. But yeah, that was my entire tournament run. Obviously, shout out to all my opponents throughout the days. Super fun games. Exhausting tournament to play that many games in a row. And I'm very happy with how I've done. Let me know down below if you guys have any questions about the list or about the tournament run in general. And I will catch you guys in the next one.